Welcome back to the TelecomTV Cloud Native Telco Summit and our live Q&A show. I'm Guy Daniels, Director of Content, and this is the second of 2 live Q&A shows today. Plus, we have 2 more shows for you tomorrow. So there's plenty of opportunity for you to quiz our panelists and guests. We've just seen the panel discussion that looked at how to harness network observability and analytics. And now we're going to expand on that, answer whatever questions you may have and dig a little deeper into the subject. If you haven't yet sent in a question, please do so now and use the Q&A form on the website. Well, joining me for this live Q&A show is, as always, Ray Maistre, Editorial Director at TelecomTV. Ray, the second live show of the day. We are in uncharted territory.
Well, Guy, I've hardly recovered from the excitement of the first live Q&A discussion, and here we are with another, but don't let it be said that we aren't good to this industry. And the good news is we have a great lineup and a really important topic to focus on during this session.
Absolutely. This whole subject of observability has been on our wish list for quite some time, so hopefully it will generate plenty of audience questions. Well, let's now meet our guests who have returned to help answer all of those questions. And joining us live on the program today are Beth Cohen, SDN Product Strategies at Verizon, Rob Sonny, Head of RAN Architecture for Service Provider and Edge at VMware, Francis Haysom, Principal Analyst with Appledore Research, and Fatih Nar, Chief Architect, Telco Partner Solutions at Red Hat. Hello everyone and welcome back to the show. Very informative panel discussion we had earlier on what is, for some of us at least, a very tricky area to fully understand, and I think you did a great job there. So let's now take a look at our audience questions and find out what they need to know. Ray, do you have our first question?
Yes, I do. Thanks, Guy. And Fatih, we'll come to you first with this one. And the question is there one observability tool that will monitor the entire network, or do we need to run several different ones? And if so, is there compatibility between them and the shared data?
It's a good question. So the answer is yes and no. No, as in the sense that there's no one silver bullet for everything, with compatible with every data format, with compatibility with every system out there. And yes, we can call it as a CAT. Since we are in the uncharted territory, you got to be curious, ambitious, and empowered with the technology. Curious as in the sense of what's your data telling you, how much data you can collect, and how you can correlate them. Ambitious in the sense of, are you ready to learn? Since we are in the uncharted territory, are you ready to learn and leverage open source tools out there and open source community with an ambition? And technology, which is coming with the open source tools and frameworks out there. So we have overseen approach in the community with the application domain, with microservices and all that, with the CNCF and LNF, Linux Foundation. We are, I think, coming to a conclusion, not there yet, we are coming to a conclusion, how we will format and how we'll exchange the data over a common, I will say, messaging bus or an interconnection of the data with the correlations and enrichment with the data mesh. Now we are talking a lot. If you go and see all the buzzwords, it used to be service mesh. Now everybody more talking about the data mesh. I think these are the key areas that will enable us to implement overseeing observability with the exchangeable, meaningful data. So the key thing with the data is you may have a data, but is it meaningful? Is it clean? Is it avoiding the biases? Is it live? Is it fresh? Is it the volume is good? So there are 3 components in the data: volume, velocity, and variety. So if you have these 3 V's in your data, that will help you to steer into a good solution for overseeing observability. And we are here as open source community to support you with your ambition and empower you with these technologies.
Okay, thanks, Fatih. Beth, is there a single tool that can be used for everything that a network operator would want to do?
I wish, but as with everything, it's always more complicated, as Fatih said, than it seems on the surface. Right now, telecoms are using a suite of tools. They don't call it OSS, BSS for nothing. And obviously many of those tools have at least some of the observability tenants built into them, but they're incomplete because many of these tools, particularly the ones that go back decades, aren't really oriented toward the new type of networking, right? The software-defined networking where you've disaggregated the layers. So that adds additional layer of complexity that needs to be taken into consideration, because you need to pull that information. So you have to log it appropriately or monitor it appropriately, and then you have to put that information back together to be observable, so that you can make suppositions from the from that data, from the observing of these events, and correlate them and say, oh, well, that's what's going on. And then, of course, we don't control all the data that's coming in. We have the network components and the hardware underneath, and the network services, but we don't own the applications, and the applications need to be part of this observability. I mean, I think that's the key change, in that now observability incorporates the entire stack all the way up to the network, all the way up to the applications.
Right. Yeah. No, great point, Beth. Which of course makes it even tougher to get the most accurate view, I guess. Francis, is there a way to to have best practice with this in terms of finding the right tools and the right way to bring the data together?
Yes, I think that's the key thing. I think I agree with what's gone before. There isn't a single tool that's going to deliver you observability. I think the best practices you need to consider in terms of observability is one. The biggest one is openness. The whole point about observability is that by observing something, you can take action on that data. So the most important thing is not whether it's in one tool, it's that the tools you use for observability are open, they can exchange data, they can provide data in the way that the applications that consume that can use in the most effective way. You need to be the tools need to be considered. Just simply, there will be two different needs and different tools for things that we may be doing real time analytics in data mesh analytics versus analytics that is working on a database and a data lake of information. So I think the most important thing is that openness, the ability to be flexible in terms of allowing open access to that data. And I think the final thing, which is really important for telecoms, which is slightly different than where observability has come in IT, is the fact that the network is distributed. You cannot get all data from the edge into the center at the same time. You're going to need the flexibility to be able to turn detailed information on, turn detailed information off, and the ability to put that positioning of processing closer to the edge and in the center as well.
Okay, interesting. Fatih, do you want to come back in with a bit more comment here?
Yes, since Francis mentioned the openness, it is essential to able to share data between applications and observability stacks and OSS BSS components to give you better perspective. But when you are sharing data, you got to be really cautious what you are sharing between systems. What is their privileges? What is their authentication authorization levels? Because you may end up having a data leak that is kind of violating the privacy of your customers. Because a lot of data we collect for observability over telecom networks has really sensitive data about the consumers, about subscribers, about the people, where they are, what they are doing, what's the population around it, what is the businesses around it. It's really sensitive stuff. Yet we got to be careful with the privately, I would say, identifiable information, and as much as we can, we gotta, I would say, cut that out. But yet we have a lot of technologies today to still identify a person from a generic data as well. So maybe some components of the observability and overseeing solution may need to run in a restricted environment for the sake of privacy and security. Maybe some others can run in a little bit more, I would say, relaxed environments such as cloud, but we got to be really cautious about what we are sharing between systems and the machine to machine as well as machine to person as well.
Okay, so the complexity levels are really ramping up here, it would seem. Rob, let's come to you on this. Is there any kind of simple solution to how this is engineered?
Yeah, I think simplicity is always something that should guide the principle of bringing things, complex sources of data together into a meaningful way. The scale and complexity of telco networks today is growing at an exponential rate. The introduction of 5G, the introduction of disaggregated solutions for RAN, core, and transport, as well as the need specifically to support a variety of new and interesting root cause analysis based use cases to understand what's happening in the network, either at a networking level or, as earlier alluded to, at the application layer, is absolutely critical. So I think what everyone is looking for perhaps is this kind of magical, mythical single pane of glass that does that for you. But what we're starting to understand is the pair of eyes is probably not enough to be able to optimize and drive the network. So this has to be machine readable, this has to be machine visible, and finally it has to be automated. So there's a cycle, a virtuous cycle of what you do with observability, that our observability drives action being orchestration or some form of automation or some form of recovery. We always tend to think of it in terms of recovery and fault recovery, but it really could be actually about improving the quality of the user experience or creating an opportunity to understand how new services might overlay on the network.
Okay, thanks, Rob. Beth, you wanted to come back in as well with some more comments here.
Yeah, I just wanted to pick up on the data privacy and the data security, and that's super important, and it kind of goes in both directions too, because it's not just that customer data. Customers have to, we need to limit the data that the customer sees to their own data. And we also need to make sure that data doesn't bleed over between customers. But the customer also needs to be shielded from seeing, the telecoms data as well. So we have to be very careful about what gets exposed so that the customer can do their own analytics. We want to make sure it's their own data that, and of course the proper, RBAC safeguards around that, just within the customer themselves, right? Because there's only going to be a limited number of people within a given customer that will have access to that set of data. It's actually a very, it's something that the telecoms, fortunately, are actually fairly good at because we have been segregating customer data for quite a long time. So the biggest problem for us is we have the data lakes. We do know how to segregate them. We need to figure out how to expose them to our customers in a way that they can actually use them in some logical way, because they're customized. The data lakes are obviously customized to our own uses.
Okay, excellent. Well, lots of great answers to that opening question there, and it seems that there's a lot of different factors coming in there about what needs to be done, and whoever can write the list of rules and policies to automate this is somebody that's going to be very successful, it would seem, in this industry. So great answers there on the question one. Guy, over to you for the second question.
Yeah, thank you, Ray. Great questions and great answers, indeed. We've got to get a move on now because we've got so many questions that are coming through. We want to get through as many as we can, give as many people as possible a chance to get their question answered. So here's a great follow-up question, and it does pick up on some of what we talked about in the panel. Beth, let me start with you because you mentioned this in the panel, I'm sure. Is anyone working at the moment on standards or specifications for observability, assuming that they are required. So anyone working on them, and actually, do we need them?
Well, we definitely need them. They are required. Verizon's working on some interesting, developing some tools I mentioned earlier for sharing data with our customers. And so what we've been doing is developing APIs. And we are actually using some standard APIs that are being developed by the TM Forum. MEF is also working on them. So there are definitely some groups out there that are working on standards more on the data side and the API side, as into, what the data is getting exposed and what you can do with it, less so on the observability. What do you do when you get the data and analyze it? What are your responses? So absolutely, we definitely need some. This is a great project for open source type communities to get involved in, the flip side, as I mentioned earlier, is the data sets themselves are non-standard. I'm working on a project called Thoth, which is related to AI, and we just don't have any good standardized data sets to work on. Everybody defines jitter differently. Everybody defines latency differently, and that's just the telco pieces. That doesn't include the performance aspects of the applications that also need to be taken into consideration. So, yeah, long, it's definitely time. So, anybody wants to volunteer, get cracking.
There you go. You heard from Beth there. Open source groups and communities. This is what we absolutely need right now. So get to it, and we should be looking at what you produce for us in next year's summit, I think. Francis, would you like to comment on this issue about specs or standards?
Yeah, I think the thing we need to recognize, there are some standards, but they're more about data access standard. How can I get hold of data from sources? So you're seeing some of this with initiatives in the core, 5G core, for example, with NWDAF. You're certainly seeing a lot of the aspects of data exposure and data standardization with the interfaces within the Open RAN community. So I think those are very, very important. And I'm sure in other areas, there will be a lot more emphasis on how do we make sure that underlying network is exposing information as well as applications. You've also got initiatives like Open Telemetry, which can help in this area. And certainly some telcos are looking at using that as a defining standard for getting hold of telemetry in an easier way. I think the challenge with the standard in observability, it really comes down to what is observability? What are we trying to do with observability? Now, the term observability comes from the real-time control as an engineering term to allow you to control something in some way. And it's really saying, here's information that allows me in some way to control that device or control the process or control something. And I think the challenge with the idea of standardization is, in some ways, yes, we can standardize for the type of processes and the type of control loops that we expect in networks today. But a lot of the challenges of, say, cloud native networks or virtualized networks is that we don't actually fully know how all of this information will be put together. We don't fully know how we will bring information from applications and a network together to make much more closed loop automation or adaptive networks in the future. So to some extent, yes, we can go and standardize for what we know at the moment, but actually a lot of the opportunity for observability will lose in that term. And to some extent, it is the ambition of the telco or the vendors that are supplying telco as to what is possible with observability. What can we enable?
Thanks, Francis, for those comments. Spot on, as always. Fatih, would you like to add some comments yourself to this viewer question about specs and standards?
Yes, please. For me, specs and standards is just kind of hinting towards certain layers in the application domain if you remember, there's OC seven layers, wholly 7 layers, starting from physical up to the application layer. So if you're talking about a certain layer, yeah, you can have some standards. There has been some standards. But if you're thinking and considering from wholly perspective of the all layers of enchilada, then you got to admit that the data that you're looking at by means of volume, velocity, and variety. The variety comes from the fact that you have getting logs, metrics, and traces from each layer, as well as external systems, some of which, say in the logs, may not be structured. Okay, now we are hitting the one keyword. The data could be structured as dictated by standard. Data could be unstructured, like spitting out the logs, and inside the logs there's not certain format or a formation. There's a significant valuable data that you can dig into. That's where the AI ML comes into a picture with the neural networks, how we can learn out of this unstructured data, over training our algorithms, and trigger something that is really complementing our observability and our control systems. So for me, the answer is, it is not possible to have standards that is one standard or set of standards compliant with each layer of the stack. That's why we should be more open-minded for variety of data with the unstructured format. Okay, so where ML and AI hopefully help us better.
Thanks, Fatih, especially for bringing up the unstructured data aspect of this. Ray, I think I'm reminded of that quote, "We don't know what we don't know." Let's move on to get our next question in, because I think this is a cracker. So over to you for our next one.
Yeah, thanks, Guy. And this question is so fresh, I can actually smell it coming off our back-end system. So I'm going to come to Francis first with this question. It's quite a long one, so here we go. Question is, how can the information coming from the network, be used in combination with non-network information, such as the billing and customer behavior data, to help uncover insights that can help make the business make more informed decisions? And are those working on network observability thinking about these broader potential uses? So the question is really about, is the data from one area being pulled together with data that's not from the network and put together for greater business use? Francis, are we at that stage yet? This is the kind of thing that's obviously been talked about for quite some time.
I think we're at the beginnings of that stage. I don't think we're fully there. It's we talked earlier about just the sheer amount of the regulation and privacy concerns in that area. But I think, as a general concept, the ability to bring information together, increasingly the experience a telco actually provides its customers is not provided by telco applications. They're provided by the WhatsApp or whatever other overlay network solution there is. So the ability to bring information from those applications and how the network is supporting those applications can only be a good thing in terms of better assurance, better delivery of commitment to SLAs potentially, or value add on that one. So I think the sky's the limit in terms of being able to combine that. But at this stage, I think we're at a very, very early stage, necessarily because of privacy concerns, but to some extent because we've tended to have a very sort of opaque relationship between the over-the-top applications and the underlying network, and there's the opportunity with observability to tie that experience much more closely together and make the telco less about the company you go to when there's a problem, and much more about an enabler of great experience. The other area I think that there is an opportunity, but again, it's a very early one, is if we start to, particularly in things like lease lines and transport networks, we start to think about sort of bandwidth on demand, connectivity on demand solutions. The very static view of how you enable overbooking of a network and routing within the network may need to change. You may need to be very conscious of how a customer uses the data when they used it, etc., as to how the network is then overlaid. So you may get more dynamic overbooking by having a view of how the customer behaves, customers have behaved, and giving you a stronger ability to sell more bandwidth when bandwidth on demand comes about. So I'll just put the option. We're at a very early stage at this time, but there's a great opportunity to do some very clever things in this area, both to enhance the network and to enhance the applications on top of it.
Okay, great. Thanks, Francis. And Rob, we'll come to you next.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a really interesting question, but one of the things that I think that we always have to keep in mind on all of these discussions about how data flows, and of course, security is an important concern in general, and privacy is always an issue. But the one thing that we have to remember, sort of underneath all of this, is that data is not free. We often think that data is available. Once it's there, we can use it, but there's real costs associated with the production of data, the grooming of data, and finally the consumption of that data. And so the way that business will ultimately benefit from this is to understand how to optimize those costs in each of those components, and different providers will have to play a role with that, whether it is on the infra side, on the infrastructure for the production of the data, an intermediary potentially with AI and ML enablement on the grooming of that data. And then finally, the consumption is a real key aspect, because often we find that applications that consume the data that we're going to use to provide observability are running in the public cloud. And we know that those who have deployed workloads at scale in a public cloud know that's not free. So the storage associated with that, as well as any additional incremental processing. So finally, you need to have value in the data that gets produced and ultimately used for any kind of action. And if we're talking about application layer actions, you can measure that directly. If you're talking about an action which has ultimately an impact on the TCO of the network, then the network provider has to look very carefully at what is he doing in terms of how does he ship data around.
Okay, Rob, great points there. Of course, all of this takes time, effort, and money as well to get right. Beth, in your experience, are the data sets from different areas being brought together to make 1 and 1 equal a great 2?
They are, and I'd say the telecoms have been dabbling in this area for a while, more on the consumer side than on the business side, but as I like to tell people, we do know where your packets are going. It's not a secret because obviously we're doing the transport. We do know where your phone calls are going, right? So we actually, telcos have an amazingly large amount of information about our customers, which we have to be very careful about. There's something called CP&I in the industry, which stands for Customer Private Network Information. And, the telcos, in the past have been burned. And, so they tend to be extremely careful about how that data is used, who accesses it, what it's used for, just to make sure that, there's trust by our customers that we will not use the data in inappropriate ways, and certainly not without their permission either. So a lot of our customers are pretty sensitive about it as well. So, so we take that whole privacy aspect of it very seriously. And for our business customers, as I mentioned earlier, they have the capability of using their own data themselves. And we have the capability of giving them some tools. For example, we have a dynamic network manager, which allows the customers to change the capacity on a circuit pretty close to real time. And they could, if they wanted, set up an automated application that would change the bandwidth based on the demand of the applications, over a period of time. We don't force that on the customer. Obviously, we share the information. Hey guys, your applications are using more bandwidth than usual, but we cannot, because it's obviously a price impacting decision, to say, oh yeah, we can add more bandwidth or reduce your bandwidth, because the customer has to make that final decision about what they're going to do with that data and the observations and that come out of that information.
Okay, thanks, Beth. And Fatih, you wanted to come in on this as well about this, bringing these different data sets together.
Yeah, so we recently published an article about cloud burst. Inside that article, there was the challenge from customer, or the ask from customer. I want to scale just before it needed to be scaled, meaning the data that I'm observing over my network, not good enough to have a predictive scaling. So what we did is, as Beth was pointing, we know where the traffic is origin and destined to on the networks, right? So how we can enrich this data with additional surrounding data out there in the uncharted territory to have a better the better operation models. So we looked at it, okay, you know what? In US, the festive season is obvious, November till to the January, starting from Thanksgiving and then Christmas and then New Year's Eve and then Black Friday, all that, and then Cyber Monday. So we looked at the data, which is available out there in the wild, by the way. The trend of searching for a keyword, online shopping. So if you look at that article, which is in the redhat.com/architect, we have a trend we got from Google Data Analytics, and we implemented also correlated with the geographic data of the subscribers. Now we have something valuable to tell you that in this time of the period of the year, in this location, we know we can predict pretty much 95%, 98% how the traffic will going to look like based on the model is giving to us. So that's where the variety of data becoming more important. And I think to the point that we got to be more open-minded about in telco TME domain about leveraging the more data that is not necessarily in telco domain. Shopping behaviors. Say you like wine and you like to drink in certain location with your friends, and you love while doing that, watching some YouTube videos or watch Netflix movies. So that is impacting network traffic together with your data that you're creating as a part of your life that can come and help us to get you a better user experience on your networking services.
Okay, thanks, Fatih. And the mention of wine there, I think, prompted Francis to want to come back in and give some further analysis. Francis, you wanted to come back in.
Yeah, I think I don't want to undermine the importance of data privacy in all of what we do, but we do need to recognise that a lot. Fatih just mentioned it. We can go and source Google, who can find shopping information about us that says we have put the word shopping into it. We willingly subscribe to the fact that Google collects that information and is able to share that information. I don't think that's about sharing personal and privacy information, but there's a lot of information about the way a consumer uses the network, which in the same way as a Google does, can be presented back to the customer as being to their advantage in sharing that data or allowing you to use that data in making decisions, whether that's a better quality of service or something like that. So we do need to consider in this a kind of maybe a hybrid approach between what the typical hyperscalers do, which is very much all data is available and should be shared and aggregated, and the kind of very secure, very regulated view of the telco. So I'm not saying it's going to be easy, but there needs to be that kind of view that, yes, some of this information is information that is advantageous for the customer to want you to use in a decision-making process or to be combined with network information because it gives them some value in terms of the service they get from you.
Okay. So loosen the strings a little bit there. Okay, great question, great answers. I think that we need to move on, guys. So back over to you.
Yeah, thanks, Ray. Talking of the holiday season, we ought to get a move on. It's time now to check in on our audience poll for this Cloud Native Telco Summit. As regular viewers know, it's one question, 7 answer options, and you can pick whichever ones you feel are the most relevant. A quick reminder that the question we are asking this week is, Cloud Native is set to deliver substantial benefits to telcos, but what are the main challenges to its adoption? Now, we have a real split of opinions there, and don't forget, these don't add up to 100%, and that's because you can vote for multiple choices. So if we have a quick peek down there, an incompatible existing operational structure, that's scoring quite an alarming 55%, which means 55% of all those who have voted cite that as a challenge to cloud native adoption. On the plus side, I guess, at least the benefits are beginning to be understood and there's support from the executive team. Those are scoring quite low. Okay, if you've yet to vote, then please do so. We've already got a load of votes in, but the more votes, the better. It keeps it more representative. We're keeping the polls open until the end of this summit. Now, we are almost at the end of the show. We have almost run out of time, but I am sure we can get a quick question and answer in. Ray, have you got another question for the panel?
I have, and Rob, this one is going to come to you first. And the question is, how does observability benefit from network automation and AI?
To some degree, I already answered the question, so I'll be really fast. It's about that circle of automation, orchestration together with observability. So observability drives action, action drives observable action, and it's a cycle. And I think we heard before about how this is a control law. So how do you make control better? We know we inject intelligence, we inject machine learning. And so I think that's where we go.
Okay, thanks, Rob. And Francis, you wanted to come in on this.
Yeah, I was going to say it's possibly the questions around the wrong way around. Is observability is the thing that enables AI decision making, and I'll particularly focus on AI and machine learning. We're kind of a transition point or an early point in terms of using AI and ML in telco. AI and ML is fundamentally determined. A lot of it is simply pattern matching and finding patterns of information, and those patterns are fundamentally reliant on accuracy and data and lots of it, and that's where observability can enable that. At the moment, a lot of the reasons we do things manually within telco at the moment or don't use AI is simply because we have gaps in our information or we need human beings to bring that information together. And observability can help in terms of filling those gaps or putting the framework in that allows us to fill those gaps.
Okay, great. Thanks, Francis. And Beth, you wanted to come in on this one as well.
Yeah, just really quickly. Observability is critical to AI because if you can't see it, you can't measure it, and you can't do anything with it. And I see that observability is particularly, in the AI space, it's particularly, the gaps are huge on the connectivity between the applications, the network, and security. And, you need to have observable information about all three of those areas, and you need to link them together to see those patterns that Francis was talking about, and then, of course, act on those patterns. Right now, security is kind of sneaking in under the radar, and those hackers are getting smarter and smarter about not doing packet storms, which are really obvious, but just kind of sneaking in every so often, and getting into the networks and doing bad things, without being observed, which is what this is all about.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. Sneaking in the back door. We don't want any of that. And Fatih will close with your comments on this question.
Thank you. So, long story short, observability is a multi-layer cake, as in the sense of, as we referred, OC layers, right? Each layer, say physical infrastructure layer, and then platform, and then services layer, each layer comes with their own tools for network automation and best approaches and best practices. Say a lot of people love out there Ansible for installing and configuring applications, and there are a lot of people who loves Terraform, for example, for infrastructure automation. So now you have another challenge. So you have to combine all these best practices and tools and harmonize them to deliver this multi-layer cake for observability. So I think that's where the challenge is. By means of in-house talent, able to comprehend this complexity is one thing, successful thing. If you can comprehend this is really multi-layer, I have to have this knowledge and experience with this layer, and then overall I can orchestrate the whole thing as an overall orchestration for automation-wise. I think just be curious what is you're looking at and inside the box and see the layers, and per layer seek out the best practices and tools for automation and leverage automation for automizing the data collection, cleaning the data, scrubbing the data, and then using the data with the ML and AI.
Okay, thanks, Fatih. And I think that's a great place to end with the thought of cake to go with the reference to wine just a few minutes ago. That's a great place to be wrapping up the show. Guy, what do you reckon?
Yeah, I'm sold. I'm out of here within 5 seconds. Thanks very much. Yes, indeed. We are out of time. Thank you so much to all of our guests who came back and joined us for this live program. And of course to our audience for sending in questions. Unsurprisingly, we still have quite a few left over, and we will do our best to add those to the list of questions for tomorrow's shows.
Yep, do remember to send in your questions to the live Q&A shows as soon as you can. Don't leave it too late. And don't forget the poll question as well. There's still time for you to have your say and for you to influence the outcome. So please vote now.
And that is a wrap for day one of this year's Cloud Native Telco Summit. Don't forget, if you missed any of the earlier programs, they will all be available to watch on demand from tomorrow. And speaking of which, Ray and I will be back with you tomorrow for day two, the final day of the Cloud Native Telco Summit. We have more interviews, roundtables, and 2 more lively Q&A shows. Now we start at 2:45 p.m. UK time. Please check the TelecomTV website for details and more information about the agenda. For now though, thank you very much for watching and goodbye.